I don't really live on compliments. Matter of fact, it has a way of distracting me. And a whole lot of other musicians and artists that are out there today, they hear all these compliments, they say, wow, it must have been really great. So they get fat and satisfied, and they get lost, and they forget about the actual talent that they have, and they start living into another world.
Jimi Hendrix is one of the most renowned and influential guitarists recorded in the annals of rock music. He was renowned for his exceptional talent, distinctive style, and ability to generate sounds that had never been heard before. His music was so revolutionary that he served as an inspiration to a generation of musicians who followed in his footsteps. Nonetheless, he was equally known for his harsh criticism of other bands and musicians. Not many could just match his standards. He didn't think he asked for much, just that they be authentic, original, and rich in emotion. He was unafraid to express his dissatisfaction with a band or artist if they failed to reach his expectations. Join us as we take a look at 5 bands that Jimi Hendrix hated during his day and where they are now. Some of them you'd never expect. Jimi Hendrix was famous for his groundbreaking guitar technique and deep musical insights, and was definitely not afraid to speak his mind about other musicians. He wasn't the only one who offered honest and scathing criticism either, but his opinions on specific bands and musical trends of the time were shared by a number of his peers, which mostly showed that others thought the same. And it wasn't just unfounded criticism. There was a larger conversation among artists aiming for authenticity in their work, of which Jimi Hendrix was a firm advocate when he criticized certain bands and musical trends. Even among his contemporaries, many felt the same way about protecting the authenticity of music. They brought attention to the ongoing debate in the music industry about how to balance artistic integrity with financial success. We're about to take a look at the common points of contention leveled against 5 famous acts he specifically was vocal about during his time, since he and others felt had strayed from the true path of the rock and roll spirit. Starting our list is a band that is very well known in rock music, even to non-enthusiasts, yet got an ear full from Jimi in their early days. Led Zeppelin and Jimi Hendrix are among the few names in the pantheon of rock that have been held in great high regard. Although they've both significantly influenced the game, there was a subtle and occasionally not so subtle rivalry and criticism between them. It was particularly from Jimi towards Led Zeppelin, more often than not. Although fans mostly dreamed of a harmonious rock and roll brotherhood, history would come to prove that futile. Led Zeppelin was established in 1968 and rapidly gained recognition for their innovative blend of psychedelic soundscapes, blues, and hard rock. They were honored as innovators due to the thunderous guitar work of Jimmy Page, the soaring vocals of Robert Plant, the arrangements of John Paul Jones, and the explosive percussion of John Bonham. However, not everyone rated them as highly. Their initial success was partially attributed to their reinterpretations, or more accurately, outright borrowing of iconic blues standards. Tracks such as Whole Lotta Love were significantly influenced by the works of Willie Dixon, Howlin' Wolf, and other artists, which led to numerous legal cases afterwards. Many purists and fellow musicians, including Jimi Hendrix, were offended by this repeated use of blues music without giving proper credit. While Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin are considered pioneers in the genre, Jimi's style had a stark difference. He was not only a pioneer in guitar technique and tone, but he also had a deeply spiritual understanding of the origins of blues, soul, and transcendental music. He considered emotional authenticity and originality to be essential components of artistry. He was candid about it, but his thoughts on the band in a 1970 interview said, "I don't think much of Led Zeppelin. I don't give them much thought." This casual dismissal was not solely a matter of personal preference. It was also a subtly critical assessment of the band's artistic philosophy. Carmine Appice, a close acquaintance of his and drummer for Vanilla Fudge, subsequently disclosed that he had more severe words in private. As per Appice, he referred to Led as excess baggage and accused them of stealing from everybody. His criticism was not solely focused on the act of borrowing these songs, but also on his perception of their creativity. He took blues influences and transformed them into new sonic dimensions, while Led, in his opinion, relied excessively on the repurposing of old material. Another source of artistic friction was their vastly different orientations to composition and performance. Jimi was renowned for his live experimentation and free-form improvisation. Led Zeppelin, despite their reputation for intense live performances, frequently prioritized bombast, theatrics, and meticulously crafted compositions. To Jimi, this appeared to be more of a spectacle than a showcase of talent. Additionally, Led's frequent use of African-American musical traditions, including blues, R&B, and funk, without explicitly acknowledging the cultural or historical context, didn't sit right with him. Jimi wasn't the only one with something to say, as many other famous musicians shared his concerns about Led Zeppelin. When asked to describe Led Zeppelin, Cream bassist Jack Bruce used strong language, calling the band a load of crap. He felt the band, for all its technical prowess, was just capitalizing on their economic success without delivering anything truly innovative. He said that the band was only performing blues covers without actually playing their own music, and that Jimmy Page's guitar work was terrible. Jack thought they lacked Cream's more spontaneous approach to fusing blues and rock. Despite Cream's reputation as a forerunner of the British blues rock trend, the Rolling Stones' Keith Richards was also skeptical of Led Zeppelin's artistic direction. Keith was quick to praise Jimmy's abilities, but he was critical of the band's general direction and sound, claiming that they focused too much on flair and not enough on substance. He stated in an interview from 1975 that they lacked the raw intensity the Rolling Stones had. When it came to rock, Keith was a strong advocate of spontaneity, which he believed they were lacking. According to him, they were more concerned with technical skill than genuine rock and roll grit, because they relied on complicated arrangements and, occasionally, over-the-top performances. Basically, when they used blues songs by artists like Willie Dixon and Howlin' Wolf without giving proper credit, it infuriated many blues purists. Although they paid homage to their blues heritage, they irritated artists who thought blues music, in particular, deserved recognition for its cultural importance due to their habit of appropriating the work of black musicians without giving due credit. Throughout their career, Led Zeppelin faced several legal trails over their uncredited use of music by black artists, particularly from the blues tradition. One of the most notable cases involved blues legend Willie Dixon, whose song "You Need Love" served as the clear foundation for Led Zeppelin's Whole Lotta Love. After he filed a lawsuit in the 1980s, the case was settled out of court, and he was later credited as a songwriter. Similarly, the band's The Lemon Song, borrowed heavily from Howlin' Wolf's Killing Floor, led to another lawsuit that was resolved with a settlement and proper attribution to Wolf. Other instances of borrowing include Bring It On Home, which lifted its intro and outro almost directly from Sonny Boy Williamson, the second song of the same name, though initially without formal permission. These cases shed light on the deeper issue of Led Zeppelin building much of their early sound on Black American blues without proper acknowledgement, a legacy that has prompted broader conversations about cultural appropriation and artistic credit. Led Zeppelin never explicitly addressed Jimmy's criticisms in public. Jimmy Page occasionally expressed admiration for his guitar work, recognizing his technical prowess and invention. Robert Plant has also acknowledged his impact on rock vocals and performance. Nevertheless, there is barely any evidence that the band felt compelled to defend themselves. Their rapidly increasing popularity adequately demonstrated their success. Rumors circulated that Jimi and Jimi might have worked together, but this never happened. In hindsight, the conflict between them was less about personal animosity and more about the conflicting philosophies of artistic integrity, innovation, and authenticity. While Jimi regrettably passed away in 1970, Led persisted in its efforts to transform rock music into their own vision, leaving a legacy that was both controversial and undeniable. While both Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin revolutionized rock, their conflicting views on authenticity and artistic integrity sparked a rivalry that would forever shape the genre. 4. Pink Floyd. In Jimi Hendrix's Black Book was also Pink Floyd, and even though many people hold them in high esteem because of their groundbreaking psychedelic sounds, ambitious conceptual music, and spectacular stage performances, he didn't. Albums such as Wish You Were Here and The Dark Side of the Moon are considered classics in the history of rock music. However, he was one of many who doubted their talent in the beginning. His love for unfiltered creative expression in music meant that he thought Pink Floyd relied too much on tricks. His contempt for bands that used visuals to cover up bad performances was evident in an interview he gave in 1969. "Here's one thing I hate, man. When these cats say, 'Look at the band, they're playing psychedelic music.' All they're doing is flashing lights on them and playing Johnny B. Good with the wrong chords." He didn't specifically mention Pink Floyd, but the comment was taken as a jab at bands like them, particularly during the Syd Barrett era, when the band was more famous for improvised jams and whirling effects than for solid skills. True psychedelic music, in his view, had to be propelled by genuine emotion and innovation, not visual diversion. Even as Pink Floyd progressed from that initial style to including more sophisticated philosophical ideas and more structured musical elements. He felt the early Pink Floyd albums lacked the kind of music that could hold its own without the aid of smoke, lasers, or projected animations. He summed up his views on music and its authenticity in this astute comment, which he said betrayed his conviction that using effects ruined the sound. There were many who shared Jimi's opinion of Pink Floyd's use of experimental music and visual effects. Bands like Pink Floyd, in Frank Zappa's opinion, were engaging in fake experimentation. Frank was famous for his intricate compositions and contempt for popular culture. He had great delight in making social criticism via music, and he frequently blasted the employment of meaningless effects and gimmicks. He felt that the early Pink Floyd albums, especially the spacey, ambient tracks, relied more on ambience and special effects than on original musical compositions. He thought that light shows and other extra elements should take a back seat to the music itself when it came to creativity. Another avant-garde musician, Captain Beefheart, also disapproved of Pink Floyd's commercially successful psychedelia. Beefheart frequently used significantly more discordant and experimental techniques, questioning conventional ideas of structure and melody. Music, in his view, needed to be unfiltered and intense, and so he saw Pink Floyd's more regulated and polished approach as an effort to commercialize what should be an untamed and unexpected art form. While their music was groundbreaking in certain respects, Frank and Beefheart believed that it fell short of their ideals of creative purity because of their emphasis on authenticity. Pink Floyd, as one of the most renowned and impactful bands at the time, disregarded his comments, and perhaps they were right. Even in the year 2025, they have not faded. Recently, in a huge movie that helped heal long-standing internal divisions, the band finalized a $400 million agreement with Sony Music, surrendering its recorded music archive and branding rights. In April 2025, theaters in the United Kingdom showed a remastered edition of Pink Floyd's Live at Pompeii, a re-release of one of the band's most evocative concerts, originally shot in an empty Roman amphitheater brought to life once more. The 2024 solo album by David Gilmour, Luck and Strange, featured previously unreleased compositions by Richard Wright. Those who have been with him for a while will hear both old and new songs on his Selective Globe tour right now. In fact, as a tribute to Jimi Hendrix, bands like Floyd are planning to stage immersive concerts fusing music and technology to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Wish You Were Here in 2025. Ironically, Jimi himself had previously rejected such a spectacle. Part 3. The Monkees. The Monkees were a made-for-television band who rode the wave of Beatlemania and became a bubblegum pop success in the 1960s. They had a TV show and hit singles that topped the charts. But to a serious performer like Jimi Hendrix, they were the personification of everything wrong with the commodification of rock and roll. Unlike him, the Monkees were founded in 1965 by TV producers who wanted to imitate the popularity and charisma of the Beatles. Peter Tork, Mickey Dolenz, Michael Nesmith, and Davy Jones formed a band that became famous fast, but genuine musicians were skeptical of them because of their background. The contempt that Jimi Hendrix felt was obvious. He famously called the Monkees dishwater, meaning they were boring and shallow. During one interview, he was quite direct, "Oh God, I hate them." To him, the Monkees were not an organic band motivated by creative fire. Rather, they were a manufactured product. It went against his beliefs that didn't involve marketing plans and business meetings, but real emotion, suffering, and originality. He felt the Monkees were less concerned with being creative and more with making money and selling records. Booking Jimi Hendrix to open for the Monkees on their 1967 U.S. tour was motivated more by music industry politics than excellent creative judgment, regardless of his strong comments. The results were obviously disastrous, as young girls who loved pop songs and the Monkees' charismatic TV performances made up the bulk of the band's fans. Meanwhile, Jimi began his concert with Purple Haze, which they couldn't really groove with, bringing on their scorn and even booing from the audience. His sexually charged stage appearance and powerful guitar skills caught fans off guard. As the days passed, the disparity became increasingly awkward. He decided to end the trip after only 7 gigs. Mickey Dolenz claims that he was humorous about it, going so far as to make fun of the mismatch while they were performing. However, his conviction that the music industry prioritized profit over talent was further proven by his experience. Jimi wasn't the only feature artist to have something to say, as although he only made a brief appearance on the Monkees TV show, Frank Zappa was very outspoken in his criticism of the band's beginnings. The commercialization of the band's formation in response to the Beatles' fame was something he frequently blasted. From his point of view, the Monkees exemplified the commercialization of rock and roll, which, according to him, had its origins in free expression, revolt, and individuality. The Monkees remained the object of John Lennon's scorn, which he expressed more diplomatically, calling them the Marx Brothers of rock. John's remarks served as a subtle jab at the band, implying that their actions were driven more by showmanship than genuine musical expression. For him, who held creative freedom in the highest regard, it was incomprehensible that the industry would put commercial success ahead of quality musicianship. Many in the music industry shared this opinion, viewing the Monkees more as a manufactured product than an organic group of individuals who came together creatively to form a band. Members of the Monkees, such as Michael Nesmith and Peter Tork, fought against their corporate image and eventually took control of their own creative production. However, Hendrix's critical statements struck a chord with many musicians who saw the band as a representation of rock music's commercialization. Truthfully, there was some quality to the Monkees. more creative autonomy was being pushed for by Michael Nesmith and others by the late 60s. Major albums like Headquarters and the experimental Head soundtrack were finally produced once they began composing and performing their own instruments, but Jimi felt those actions were too late to gain his admiration. Now reissues and fan nostalgia constitute the only remaining form of the Monkees' legacy in 2025. 2021 saw the demise of Michael Nesmith, while Peter Tork passed on in 2019 and Davy Jones in 2012. The band's last remaining member, Mickey Dolenz, is still in demand for tribute performances and, in 2024, released Dolenz Sings R.E.M., a widely received album that reimagined alt-rock standards with a Monkees twist. The Monkees' cultural influence in the 1960s is being honored with retrospective deluxe editions of recordings by Rhino Records. The legend of the Monkees has grown despite the shaky start and early restrictions on their creativity. Although they are today viewed as a respectable band by many, during Jimi Hendrix's time, they represented the shallow commercialization of a craft he greatly admired. And while they achieved success in the end, he and many others still shared the same views on their origin. While Jimi Hendrix fiercely criticized the Monkees' commercialized pop formula, his volatile relationship with Jim Morrison showcased a different clash of rock ideologies, one rooted in authenticity and discipline versus chaos and rebellion. Jim Morrison. Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison were two of the most renowned personalities of the 1960s rock culture. They both had explosive performances and were boundary-pushing artists. Their encounters were far from peaceful, though. Jim frequently embraced disorder, inebriation, and shock value, in contrast to Jimi's profoundly spiritual and disciplined approach to music. In 1968, during a jam session at New York's The Scene, a nightclub famous for rock royalty, that beef reached a boiling point. In the middle of Jimi Hendrix's set, an inebriated Jim stormed the stage, yelling obscenities and making indecent gestures. Even Jimi, who usually maintains his composure when performing, couldn't seem to keep a straight face anymore. It was reported that Janis Joplin attempted to defuse the situation, but it was already too late. In the aftermath of the incident, Jimi would decide not to ever perform on stage with Jim, basically saying he could handle it himself. Soul musician Geno Washington remembered another event that revealed even more of Jim's bad behavior when he saw him attempting to inject himself into a Jimi Hendrix performance. At the time, Jimi firmly turned him away this time, saying, "That's okay, fella. I can handle it myself." The dismissal was made with the intention of safeguarding the music and not necessarily to satisfy anyone's ego. Even though he was a fearless pioneer, Jimi could not stand what he perceived as distracting performance pandemonium. Jim Morrison, in contrast, considered provocative themes inherent to art. Even while the Doors left an indelible mark on music history with songs like The End and Riders on the Storm, Jim's erratic behavior occasionally threatened to overshadow the band's artistic genius. Although Jimi appreciated innovation, he did not approve of it when it compromised concentration and reverence for the art form. It was not uncommon for Jimi and Jim Morrison to argue, especially during their wild jam sessions. His unpredictable and heavily intoxicated behavior irritated numerous musicians. Another rock band, the Kinks, had a tumultuous history with the Doors. Lead singer Ray Davies was particularly critical of Jim Morrison's public presence. Ray frequently thought his hedonism was more impressive than his music. Jim was undeniably a captivating lead singer, but many musicians who were serious about their work found him annoying due to his unpredictable behavior. For Jimi Hendrix, the performing arts were a sacred art form, and he placed a premium on authenticity and discipline in his shows. He had no patience for Jim Morrison's disorganized musical style, particularly when it damaged the quality of the performance. The Doors' legacy lives on, despite Jim Morrison's untimely death in 1971 at the young age of 27. Even in 2025, people are still into their music, which have been remastered and re-released in theaters and on streaming platforms in early 2025. The Doors live at the Hollywood Bowl sparked renewed interest in the band's distinctive live performance style. Robbie Krieger and John Densmore, who are still alive and well, are often asked to reflect on the complexities of Jim's personality in interviews, talks, and books that explore his genius and explosive side. Their March 2025 album, Break On Through Again, is John's latest book delving into the band's core ideology, which includes his preoccupation with death, dreams, and Dionysian anarchy. Jim and Jimmy may have had their differences, but history has made a way for them both. They stood for the extremes of rock rebellion, one based on precision for transcendence and the other on insanity for release. Jimi Hendrix didn't dislike the Doors' music because Jim was too risk-taking. On the contrary, he liked musicians who did just that. Jimmy just saw Jim's carelessness as disruptive and self-indulgent, rather than daring artistic expression. Two dominant forces, each motivated by a distinct vision of rock music's ideal form, clash in the now famous Jam at the Scene. Though their paths would never cross again, the brief encounter between them serves as a reminder of the creative tensions that characterized the 1960s, a decade marked by ideological and musical friction as much as fusion. So far, we've gone through a list filled with unique things Jimmy hated, from copywriter issues to visual psychedelics and even chaos crazier than the norm. Now, to finish our list, is one you could say was far too polished for his tastes. Motown. Arguably one of the biggest names in the 60s, Motown Records shook up the pop and soul music industries. Berry Gordy started the label, which had songs by artists including Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, The Temptations, and The Supremes. The smooth production and universal appeal of Motown's music made it an era-defining label. However, not everyone was smitten. Although Jimi Hendrix dabbled in R&B and soul circuits early in his career, he was never at ease with Motown's polished approach. The music on the label was too impersonal, too contrived, and too commercial, in his opinion. In an interview, he was blunt about his opinions of them, saying Motown has a very synthetic and commercial sound. It has a synthetic soul quality and is heavily produced electronically. What he perceived as emotional sterility was another reason for his criticism, because he didn't feel anything from them because it's so commercially produced and well-arranged. It's not the authentic sound of African-American performers. Music to him, as we've explored so far, should be an emotional release rather than a commodity. And these quotations show his steadfast commitment to authenticity. Many other musicians were also skeptical of Motown's polished, commercially successful sound. Singer Nina Simone was another vocal opponent of Motown's treatment of black music, aside from Jimi Hendrix. She was famous for her passionate performances and politically oriented music. Unlike Motown's polished sound, which she believed was more concerned with entertainment than emotional honesty, her music was very intimate and unflinchingly true. The attempt to please popular audiences, she implied in her previous description of it as a soul for the masses, cast doubt on its sincerity. Not only that, but legendary jazz trumpeter Miles Davis called Motown slick and commercial. His main issue was that music was losing its soulful quality, particularly in the Motown sound's pop-soul hybrid. He believed that music's fundamental value was in its capacity to stimulate, test, and mirror the artist's inner anguish. In contrast to Motown's focus on polished production and memorable choruses, He preferred a more intricate and improvised style of music. The passionate essence of black music was diminished, in his opinion, by Motown's strict management and micromanaged production technique, and this remained true despite his support of performers like Little Richard and the Isley Brothers. He believed that music should be risky, impromptu, and spiritual, rather than optimized for AM radio. Despite his admiration for several of Motown's musicians, he rejected their sound. The system, he said, was to blame, since it allowed producers to manipulate a song's lyrics and instrumentals to reach the widest potential audience. It went against his principles as an artist who thought that the most authentic representation was in its most natural state of imperfection. Despite his and many others' opinions, the influence of Motown remains indisputable, and its legacy is more powerful than ever, even in 2025. New fans are being introduced to the history of Motown through its tribute shows like The Magic of Motown. Universal Music Group's Hitsville Reimagined is a new documentary series that was set to premiere in February 2025. The series would follow current and former performers as they reflect on the label's impact and rise to fame. Massive crowds flocked to Detroit's Motown Museum after its significant expansion, which featured interactive exhibits honoring artists like Smokey Robinson, Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye. Many contemporary artists look to Motown as an exemplar of black musical greatness because of the way it combined commercial innovation with cultural expression. However, for Jimi Hendrix, who operated according to a different set of principles, it was always the surface, not the core, of the movement. Many people shared these views because they wanted to avoid the commercialization and shallowness they perceived in popular music and keep it true to its original intent. A number of musicians, including Jimmy, Frank, Jack, and Keith, were committed to keeping music free from commercial exploitation and instead using it as a platform for authentic artistic expression. They were part of a larger cultural backlash against the commercialization of rock and soul in the 60s and 70s, when they criticized artists like Motown, Pink Floyd, the Monkees, The Doors, and Led Zeppelin. Their opinions, although scathing at the time, were crucial to comprehending the larger development of music during that period, a time when genuineness was frequently forsaken in pursuit of financial prosperity. The way Jimi Hendrix feels about these 5 bands says a lot about his musical philosophy. Music was more than just a means of entertainment for him. It was an art form that required originality, heart, and authenticity. Bands that, in his opinion, were too concerned with chart success to truly express themselves artistically, or who relied on gimmicks or mimicked others, quickly lost their patience. Though critical, his remarks also revealed his dedication to music and his desire to break new ground. Even when it went against the grain, he never shied away from saying what was on his mind. Part of what made him a legendary figure in the music world was his unwavering attitude and devotion to his trade. Ultimately, Jimi Hendrix's impact extends far beyond the music he produced, as it ultimately encompassed the ideals and principles he established for the music industry. He taught us that genuine creativity originates inside, and his legacy lives on in the music industry today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed diving into Jimi Hendrix's thoughts on these iconic bands, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more. And hey, check out the next video to discover which 5 bands Jimi really couldn't stand. Click right here.